Censorship is a Western value. The key to ruling over a great number of people is to keep them divided. That is how empires throughout history have been ruled. In the 18th century, Rousseau once observed that the bigger the state or comparable political construction, the less freedom for the individual. He was absolutely right. The globalist rulers of Europe, the EU commissars, and the extensive organizational pyramid they have put in place, ceaselessly remind us all that Europe stands at the pinnacle of civilization, and that democratic European values, also known as Western values, are superior. These include freedom of speech and the inviolability of the human body. These values and rights are enshrined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These rights may still exist on paper, but in practice they have been subverted piecemeal and hollowed out by the European evil elite. This process has been underway since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the real existing socialism around 1990, and was accelerated during the 21st century. As long as the Soviet Union existed, it was easy to keep the citizenry all over Western Europe subdued by pointing to the danger of a Soviet invasion. Therefore, after the end of the Cold War, for a while the sky seemed clearer than ever before. The globalist elites now needed to find something else with which to keep the population subdued. So they came up with acid rain and the hole in the ozone layer. All forests would soon disappear due to acid rain, and anyone who would use anything ranging from hairspray to whipped cream from a spray can actually, was guilty of accelerating the end of life as we know it, because it would make the hole in the ozone layer even bigger. These issues disappeared overnight when the 3 WTC towers in New York were brought down on 11 September 2001. Most definitely, this was a very elaborately planned and superbly executed enterprise, and the official narrative was swallowed hook, line and sinker by most people. Initially, that is. Very soon, however, doubts began to circulate, modestly at first, but then morphing into a vast movement of disbelievers all over the West. In the US, those who refused to believe the official narrative were branded conspiracy theorists, and the term was quickly translated into the various European languages and similarly weaponized. Although the concept conspiracy theorist dated from the 1960s, when in the US it was used to disqualify and socially isolate those who would not believe the official narratives on the Kennedy murders, after 9/11 it became a tool to create social division all over the American empire. The operations against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and later Syria planted even more seeds of doubt, to the effect that the basis was laid for a profound social dichotomy. On the one hand, those who continued to trust their government, on the other hand, a growing number of skeptics. Their numbers grew even more during the Great COVID show. Although statistics on who did and who did not take the jab sometimes show remarkable differences from one nation to another, it is an open question whether these statistics are anywhere near reliable. The best assumption seems to stick to the Pareto figure of 80-20, with 20% in the West not taking the jab. The Great COVID show and the subsequent great power confrontation within the Ukraine have solidified the social dichotomy that has now become evident all over the West. It is especially in Europe, because of its status as a region under the US yoke, that this deep societal rift presents a special problem. If allowed to go unchecked, this might lead to individual European nations trying to leave the fold. Although the European ruling elite has consistently failed to prove it is capable of independent, original thought, it seems to have understood the danger resulting from the current societal dichotomy. Yet instead of adapting its policies to the new reality in accordance with those celebrated Western values, it has chosen to fight anyone who disagrees with the EU commissars. For want of reliable data, it is reasonable to assume that the overall percentage of citizens rejecting the official narrative on anything ranging from COVID to the Ukraine and from anthropogenic climate change to the annual rate of inflation stands at about 20. As long as it stays there, everything is fine and dandy, but it becomes problematic whenever that percentage would rise to 30 or even higher. This is why ever new methods and techniques of thought control have been unleashed on the European citizenry. The end of it is not yet nearly in sight. Social media are currently the target of a wholesale attack on the freedom of speech, ostensibly in an effort to protect minors from harmful content on social media and to fight the abuse of children by pedophiles. Behind closed doors, remember those Western values, European commissars have decided to impose stricter voluntary controls. This will mean that users eventually have to identify themselves by way of digital or facial scans, all because the public is in need of protection. Besides, if a protection racket works for the mafia, it will work for the government. Citizens need to feel safe and be protected against many dangers, not only against child pornography, but also against hate speech. Moreover, they need to be properly informed at all times by the news that needs to consist of real information. No disinformation, therefore. Nobody seems to realize that the very concept of disinformation is utterly nonsensical. It is actually a non-word, a weaponized mindfuck. Every message, each news item carries information. Some or all of it might be untrue, but it is still information. To put it differently, each and every lie also carries information. Therefore, the word disinformation is a contradiction in terms. How anyone can reconcile the weaponized use of the term disinformation with Western values, such as free speech, is a mystery. Yet the EU commissars go one step further as they intend to decree new rules, making it impossible for anyone to speak his mind on social media. A kind of full spectrum domination of social activity. A kind of full spectrum domination of social media activity by citizens is being prepared. At the same time, it is a tool for the elite to keep the public divided so as to be able to control it more effectively. This very usefulness may, however, have prevented the elites from analyzing the subject more profoundly. What can we conclude from this? In the first place, it seems to indicate that the EU commissars are very much afraid and that they are finally realizing that growing numbers of Europeans are opposed to their policies. At the same time, they have concluded there is no turning back. It is almost as if they are so afraid of the wrath of the citizens that out of desperation they have decided to control the speech of 450 million Europeans. Therefore, the latest decisions of the EU commissars are a testimonium per propertatis, a proof of utter intellectual and ethical poverty. Any government that resorts to the kind of measures decreed by the Brussels bureaucrats is inherently weak and implicitly realizes that its days are numbered.
Well, I'd like to thank Hans Vogel for his quite substantial introduction to today's topic, which of course is censorship in Europe. And the title of a Substack article he has written that I advise people to read. So, censorship is a European value, and we will put a link under this podcast so that people can read and subscribe to Hans' Substack, which is worthwhile perusing sometimes. And this brings us to our panel discussion tonight, which of course includes Hans Vogel as the person who introduced us to the topic, Sietse Bosman from Frisha, and myself, Alexander Wolfheze, your host for tonight. We thank you for joining us, and I would like to give some first impressions about what Hans has just introduced to us, this topic, censorship. So, what comes to mind as a classically schooled person is the term damnatio memoriae. So that means something like the excision of memory, the memory holding procedure that we are facing alongside censorship, in my view, is as much a part of this very complex totalitarian system that's being built around us. And in ancient times, damnatio memoriae, it just meant that your name was physically removed from scrolls, from inscriptions, and from public records, to say that your memory will not live on. That's basically what it means. Of course, this is a quite ancient practice. It comes from, it is known as long as history has been recorded. And my field, Mesopotamian languages and cultures, gives good examples of this. So you can find stelae and murals on which cuneiform names have been excised, literally removed, which of course indicates that something has happened that was unpleasing to later generations. Of course, in Egypt, ancient Egypt, the same happened. Names of pharaohs were changed posthumously or excised altogether. And of course, there's a ritual aspect to this. It was not just a political act of wanting to rewrite history, it was also a religious act, purification act, as it was considered in that time. And I think what we are seeing in our modern Europe is a kind of inverted process. We are seeing the same ritualistic aspect of people being, we say, cancelled, being articles even recently written are being memory holed, knowledge is being excised from the public domain, libraries are being closed down or stripped of special books. Online censorship is not something that starts with the present, in my view. It starts with the past. It starts with the rewriting of the past. Of course, there are people that represent in the present the past, historians foremost, but also other storytellers, people with so-called long memory. And these people, they have to be removed from the public discourse if history is to be rewritten successfully. Now, there are other aspects, of course, that seem very modern to the censorship machine that's being built in the West, in Europe in particular. And one of these, of course, is the technological aspect. Techne, being a European, one of the European civilization's great achievements, is now being turned against itself. Technology has been a tool for liberation, many have said in the past. So printing press has spread knowledge and has liberated people. The digital system called internet, of course, has also contributed to freedom in the past. Everybody that has consciously lived the early days of the internet can remember the joy of finding all kinds of amazing information that was very difficult to access previously, just online in archives. But of course, that time is already long past us. Now, of course, Hans Vogel's contribution focused on opinionating now, of freedom of expression now, social manipulation now. But of course, this process of censoring these things has been gradual. And in my view, it has overtaken public discourse somewhere in the mid-10s. I think it was about 2015, 2016, around the Trump election, that censorship took on absurd forms in the West. I remember that one of our dissident colleagues, who used to be very famous, one of the people that actually built YouTube, Stefan Molyneux, who had the record number of subscribers, I think it was like 24 million subscribers to his YouTube channel. He was eliminated, and I think that was for me something like a milestone. From that point onwards, I didn't believe in any further freedom of speech online. Now, I have given my view of this predicament, and I would like to ask Sietse, what is your view on what Hans has just told us, and your view of the censorship predicament that we are in under European Union legislation, as well as mass media habits, simply cultural habits? What's your view of that?
Yes. Well, I think just as you're saying, it is getting more and more aggressive. And it has to do with, on the one hand, of course, the arrival of the internet, as you already stated, that brought with it unknown or unprecedented amounts of information. And people could look up all kinds of things, including, of course, all kinds of lies that governments did. Many people before the rise of the internet still had a very strong faith in their governments and were living in this programmed state of mind that the government was their friend, never told any lies, and always was looking out on their behalf. And when internet, became a thing, then conspiracy theorists became a thing with it. And of course, they were always considered fringe and tinfoil hat people. But we live in the remarkable reality that these conspiracy people keep being proven right. We have so many incidents of government lies that have been proven true, that the governments now instinctively feel that they must curtail the freedom of expression because there are just too many eyes going over their actions. Because even though we sometimes speak very negatively about so-called keyboard warriors, this is a term that we use for people who aggressively debate on internet or act more tough than they are, and they might just be nerds and act all tough, and we call these people keyboard warriors. Yet there is a large group of people with an almost autistic spectrum-like focus who delve through archives, through released previously inaccessible documents, government documents, document files. We're talking about batches of files, thousands to millions of pages long, and they pour through them. They use self-programmed artificial intelligence programs to decode and study these documents, and this is simply unacceptable to the government. The average Joe who spends time on Facebook and all of things like that, that's not really a danger to the government, because these major programs are of course all part of the deal, part of the program, and it is what we would discuss perhaps later. It is all predictive programming. So it is a constant stream of manipulation, of half-truths, of omission of truths, to steer public opinion into a certain direction. And public opinion, it can be played as easily as a fiddle. It's a thing that can be manipulated very, very easily. All you have to do is read the works of Edward Bernays to understand the power of propaganda and the repetition of messages, and of omitting a lot of other messages. So it is these fanatical people who keep delving in documents and unearthing all kinds of things the government does that are, well, very detrimental to its own population, that they must curtail. And because, and that's the strange thing, the governments actually all write down what they want to do. This entire censorship infrastructure has been in the making for quite some time, and if you delve through the archives or the internet sites of the European Union, and there are many, many, many sites, you will find all of their plans written down perfectly and very elaborately in all kinds of documents and all kinds of treatises, and they want to stop that. They simply want to stop people finding out what their plans are, and therefore such aggressive censorship is a must for them. It is an absolute must.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, Hans, what do you think about our reactions, and would you like to add something?
I think both of you are absolutely right. Although I think that in the examples you gave are all very, pertinent. However, it's not only the guys who the guys who work on big stacks of former or secret documents that have been sort of made available to the public, but I think the people who govern us do not realize that the problem lies in many smaller things. Whenever it will result impossible for them to control the internet and the public space on sort of the debate room that we function in, to such an extent that they can flatten out any sort of disturbance of the surface. The smallest detail of what governments are going to say and tell us in the future, the smallest detail is not according to what people see and know about in their own lives from their own experience, will cause people to question the government. So what we're seeing here is a government actually actively working to erode its very own power base. So I have a more positive approach to this. I think the government, by going this way, choosing this road, is making it impossible for itself to continue governing, because they, for instance, whatever is happening, they will say this road is closed because of road works on sort of maintenance work on the road, but people read about this and they live near the road and they can tell that the road is not being closed for maintenance works. So this sort of small things, and there will be many more of them than just one or two incidents, so it will be all over the place, will cause people to doubt the government. So the rift between governments and the governed will even increase. That's what I think. Maybe you would not agree with me, but please tell me so if you don't.
Well, I think you bring up a valid point. And this is the speed at which the smallest details are being adjusted and readjusted. So I like to bring up in this conversation a term that has been coined by my colleague in Geopolitica in Russia, Professor Dugin. He coined the term democracy. So the rule of speed. And I think here we are touching on a very important aspect of modern technology. So the speed at which adjustments can be made to reality. And I think this is something that is now also part of the censorship process. So it is real-time surveillance and real-time adjustment. So ironing out the smallest possible problems in real time. And this brings us to, let's say, real-time behavior control almost, because if reality can be adjusted individually and very fast, then there is also no common truth. So, for example, let's say that a Wikipedia page being produced by me is being slightly altered in respect to the same page being used by another person, or news being filtered through and adjusted according to the individual person. We are already seeing this, of course, in marketing, on commercial products, that advertisements are being fashioned for specific target audiences, and even more on an individual basis already. In social media, that's already taking place. But of course, the next step would be to adjust information of other types as well, including what you were just mentioning, for example, traffic information, weather information, which can be used to manipulate people. So manipulate in the sense that you might take a different road than you would have otherwise chosen on the basis of wrong information, or dressing differently because the weather prediction is different. And I think this let's say, very detailed interference in people's perceptions is quite important. And I think here we are touching upon an aspect that has already been brought up by Orwell. Orwell, he, of course, lived in a more crude and less technologically advanced time, but he brought up the possibility of adjusting the reality on a personal level by personal recipe. So, of course, the famous test was to hold up the number of fingers, and they should be 6 instead of 5, right? And this, I think, is also this attempt to change reality in front of our eyes, despite of our own best efforts of comprehending and of seeing. This is, in fact, a kind of a battle of wills. The government is telling us, or powers that be are telling us to perceive in a certain way, to perceive in a certain manner, no matter what we perceive as reality, or no matter what we know from the past, or no matter what we think we have seen in the past. And I think we have seen this on a quite large scale already attempted during the COVID epidemic. So we didn't see mountains of bodies lying next to the road, but we were told that there is a pandemic. And I think the government got quite brave. The regime got quite emboldened by
Yes.
its ability, its apparent ability to form a reality in people's heads here inside here. And I think this is quite it's quite a profound experiment in cognitive manipulation. I think more than just censorship. It's going beyond just the censorship level. I like to remind people also of the almost ritualistic aspects to this surveillance system. So, for example, we have a surveillance system that Snowden and Assange have pointed to. It's called the Five Eyes. Of course, these are the five Anglo-Saxon countries from which this globalist control system is being rolled out everywhere. And these five eyes, of course, they are the 5 points of the pentagram. Yeah, pentagon, pentagram. It's a symbol that is quite prevalent among globalists. Another example is the name of the great company Palantir. So Palantir, it's of course Thiel's, this billionaire Thiel's pet project of creating a real-life panopticon, a panopticon that's able to surveil everybody, everywhere, in real time, all the time, irrespective of the topic. And I think this title has also not been chosen by coincidence. So Palantir, the Palantir, of course, in people familiar with the Lords of the Rings, is the all-seeing stone. The stone in which you can see the future, the past, and the present, which allows you to control world events. So I think these terms that we are seeing, these names, they are not just a coincidence. They are saying something about the mindset of the people that are building up this system. So it's a control system, a mind manipulation system that has certain aims and certain targets that are slowly becoming apparent. I find this a very important aspect, because the belief system that guides our overlords, or our would-be overlords, the people that are building the surveillance system, is quite important to understand the aim of this surveillance system. It's not just surveillance for surveillance sake. There is a program behind this surveillance system that's being built up. Of course, on a political level, you can call it Israelization, in the sense that Israel is a kind of a perfect panopticon state that allows total surveillance. And Israeli technology is, of course, widely known to be at the forefront of these technological advances. So that also says probably something of the ideological direction that we are taking. But I will give it back to you, Sietse, your thoughts.
Well, you already mentioned Orwell, and I wanted to reference him as well, because with his Ministry of Truth and the Ministry of Language also, they wanted to reduce the number of words available to the public. So I think that's a very interesting phenomenon, because we have discussed this before in earlier episodes. Language is like the resolution of a printer, right? The more words you have in your vocabulary, the higher definition you can formulate of reality. The more dense and deep your understanding of the world around you. And if your language or vocabulary is eroded, then you lose the ability to make sense of the world inside your own mind. And this is exactly what is going on. Of course, it is not. It is very pernicious in the sense that words are disappearing from circulation without even necessarily there being a open censorship mechanism. It is the media and the news outlets and all of these controlled systems that simply remove words from circulation. And if you look at the studies nowadays, the amount of words that the average Western person knows, or at least in the Netherlands and surrounding countries, is dropping dismally. It is it's just very scary that a lot of words that were common use 10 years ago simply disappear. And when you look at, for instance, the rise of artificial intelligence, of course, AI is being used in all kinds of programs that are used to assist us, quote unquote. For instance, a program like Grammarly, it is an assistant for writing. And when you write an article and then you put it in Grammarly, so it will take out your writing errors or help with fluency or with the structure of your article. It suggests all kinds of alterations to your text that simplify it, that point out that you're using words that are not used a lot anymore. So if you use big words, so to say, complicated words, then these AI programs will point out that your audience does not understand this and that you have to remove them. So it is cloaked in a sort of image of assistance, but it is a very pernicious form of censorship and taking language out of reality. And I've read a study recently that suggested that up to 50% of all entities that you interact with on the internet, so on Facebook or on Twitter or on whatever social media program, are bots. And these also display the same behavior of very simplistic arguments, very simplistic language formulation, and you can argue with an entity, and you can actually be convinced you are having a discussion with another human being somewhere around the world, but it's simply another phone in a bot farm somewhere in China or in India, and these all steer public opinion to certain into certain directions, because these bot farms are of course paid for. We don't know exactly who is paying for these things, but there's obviously a flow of capital that is pushing these bot farms. Now, of course, we just learned that our own Frans Timmermans is now, he refused to go to his sentencing, but there is an ongoing investigation of this politician in Europe because he funneled enormous amounts to NGOs and to bot farms and such institutions to manipulate the public opinion towards the acceptance of his Green Deal and other affiliated government programs. And this is, of course, highly illegal and very unethical, but it still goes on. And these are all part of this massive entity, let's say, that is appearing, and it is consisting of multiple facets, multiple prongs, but it is one giant mechanism. And I found it very interesting that there was a recent movie called Mission Impossible, the latest iteration or latest sequel, and it is about the entity, an AI program that they lost control of, and it is taken over all of media and all of the newspapers and all of the information industry, basically. And just as Alexander said, manipulates the story to be different to all kinds of different audiences. So warring factions would get different types of information, completely distorting the nature or the nature of the information of the conflict. And nobody basically on Earth could actually be sure that what the information that they got is true. And I think that we are steadily moving towards this situation, because I firmly believe that motion pictures are, as well as are predictive programming in the extreme, in that they are actually telling us through movies what they are going to do and what they want, in the sense that these films become not just science fiction, but perhaps documentary. Right? So this film is describing a perfect chaos created by this entity, and I believe we're already in that situation. If you engage in social media programs and things like Facebook or Twitter, as I said, you cannot assume you are getting the right information. And And in fact, Elon Musk might boast that X is now the largest news outlet in the world, is a highly dubious claim, because what is the news that you're getting? And as you already said, symbolism is very important. And if you look at the symbol for X's AI program called Grok, it is literally a representation of Saturn. So it's an occult reference there again. And I think we were heading into a very troublesome time in terms of digital information, and how we're going to counter that is an interesting discussion.
Well, your take on this ritualistic aspect and on this signaling from the side of the elite, how do you look at that, Hans?
Well, I would I completely agree with what Sietse just said, and I can only second that. But I would like to add something else, because we're seeing before us a system that is becoming ever more complicated by the day. And it depends on it creeps into a million it's like fine arteries in your fingers or in the ends of your toes, okay, where the very fine network of blood vessels that bring and take blood from to and from your extremities. That's a system we're being led into. It's already there, as Sietse rightly said. But then it's all electronic. It's all electronic. It depends on feeding with electricity. And we're seeing around us that the very electrical system that's being installed now with windmills and with solar panels is becoming more and more unreliable by the day. In Germany, they have to adjust continuously to the fluctuating energy offerings of wind parks, etc. So it's becoming increasingly a problem. So the system is being made more complex on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's becoming more dependent on a few sources of energy. And this will make the entire system very, very unstable. And people are already disposing of, they have fewer words at their disposal to deal with everyday realities. I agree with that. But at the same time, they can there's also some core inside them that I hope and I think, and that's what I'm basically trustful in this respect, that will make them open their eyes at one point or another. So even if you have a limited vocabulary and you have been obeying government directives for all your life, and your family does, and your friends do, and everything, it's inevitable that a point will come where you say, well, this is untrue, this is wrong, and that you see the light. That's what I think. I think the system cannot be functioning. It's impossible for the system. It's a bit, you can compare it a bit like the German invasion, to Operation Barbarossa in Russia. Each day, as the Germans were advancing rapidly in Germany, each day as they made more progress, the lines of communication from the front lines to the back lines became longer, but also the need for the communication lines between the different prongs of the advance all across Russia became longer and impossible to maintain. So as the operation grew and grew and grew and was more successful, it became bogged down by means of its very success. And I think we are witnessing maybe a similar process now today. That's what I think, and that's why I'm I agree with the negative analysis, but also I think there's a source of light, a beacon of light out there shining at us and signaling us that it's impossible to maintain this system. What do you think?
I think it is very, of course, it is easy to blame hostile forces, the hostile elite. It is easy to see the forces at work behind projects like Palantir, the Five Eyes. But I do believe that the problem is more complex than that. I do believe that the surveillance state is not just a product of power-hungry potentates that wish to allocate to themselves excessive funds and excessive powers. I think here we are also dealing with a cultural identity crisis of sorts. Look, you see people escaping into digital reality, right? They are living in digital spheres. People look more in their screens than they look around them. People look more down into their screens than up into the sky. Don't Look Down, it is a movie title quite recently, showing that reality for people is changing. People are looking for alternative reality. They're feeling better in that reality than in, let's say, kinetic reality. I think reality has never been popular, probably. I think as long as humans are around, they have been fascinated by mythologies, religion, stories, and they have, of course, there's also this extra tendency of being enscolded in a safe sphere, being in a bubble, a home sphere, which is, of course, a logical result of the feminization of our culture. So that's let's say, a safe place that you can close the curtains, you can close the door, you don't have to face reality, and in that sphere, everything is safe. It's like the mother womb, but then extended. And I think this psychological mindset, this infantilization, this feminization causes people to escape in a certain way into the digisphere, into digital reality. And I think the government and other powers, they're just taking advantage of that. They are just using all these data that are being fed into this fake sphere for their own purposes. But that does not mean that they are not responding to a real need, a real wish on the part of the people that use it. And I think one of the explanations of the very easy way in which people have practicated their freedom is this. They literally prefer to be in a cocoon that is protected by the preset ideas of the government, by the functioning systems of the government, in which they don't have to take responsibility, they don't have to act independently. I think, for example, for many people, the lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns, were a very good time. People didn't have to go out to work. Yeah, they didn't have to go out to work. Mm-hmm. Food was brought to their doors by delivery services. They could do everything online, and they didn't have to face reality. And I think this part of the problem we tend to underestimate from dissident right. So most dissident rightists are quite independent people, would say libertarian-minded mostly, and not very aware of the condition of the mass of the people, which is in fact a kind of a slave state, a state of vegetation, infantilized, feminized, enslaved. And I think this has its own dynamics. To understand it, it is not enough to just say, okay, there is this overriding force which is now going to control it. There is a certain kind of motivation from under to be in this state, to use less words, to think less, to have to take less decisions. And I would venture here a very particular thesis. Maybe that's something that's interesting for people to chew on. There has been in European history always this tendency in European nations of self-reflection, of self-criticism, of inner discovery, of intellectual discipline, which is also very Christian. Introspection, it's called, the monastic life. And part of that has always been transparency. So that can be in a very worldly sense. It can also be in a spiritual sense. Transparency of your life, being open to all comers, nothing to hide. Everything is perfect. So a monk in his cell, he has nothing to hide. He has no private property. His life is transparent and perfect. And I think this tendency has been secularized, unfortunately. And people around us, they are having this monastic idea. I have nothing to hide, and I am perfect. I can be perfect. I can show my financial transactions. I can show my personal life. And they are putting it in a secular form. And this is very dangerous because In a secular form, it is different. Because in the religious life, it's a choice. You choose for a certain religious life, and you can discipline yourself by your own wish. But when it becomes secularized, it becomes a role model for everybody, and then the
It's prison.
the dominant panopticon becomes repressive to everybody that doesn't conform to it. And I think this is a very, I would say, a kind of modernization of this very ancient Christian idea, which is, I think, probably something European, specifically European. It is the introspection, the sense of shame, the sense of self discipline. And I think this is a very scary thought, because if that is true, if this mechanism is now being, let's say, weaponized by our overlords, and it's being used, then it can go to extreme length. Then we can really end up in what Foucault called the panopticon. Yeah, so an all control system, something like a concentration camp in which people are voluntarily placing themselves. But that's just thought that I have on this matter.
And
Sietse,
happy
what do you
about it,
think?
yes.
Yes, exactly. You
Yes,
will own nothing and you'll be happy, because
yeah.
that's what monks are supposed to be. In any case, what do you think, Sietse?
Well, as you said, the Christians, of course, and people who went into a monastery did so voluntarily. And basically, the idea was to be naked in the eyes of God, to be fully transparent, to fully surrender the identity and the self to a deity, to lose oneself and lose the idea of an ego, and to try and unify yourself with the metaphysical aspects of God. And I think that there has been a process of deification of the technological God, or technological system turned into a God. So the same aspects that you describe as monks in a monastery, people display it just with the psychological aspects that you just pointed out. That I have nothing to hide. I don't mind the censorship. It is to weed out the criminals. It is to weed out whitewashing of money and all of these things. That so they want to be naked in the eyes of the technological God in order to feel good about themselves, I guess. And this is of course what Nietzsche hated about Christianity. It is this the tendency of most people to lose oneself and to negate the personal identity and to become part of the blob, basically. That's what his entire concept of slave morality and Superman was about. It was about transcending this thing. And we have, of course, dissident writers love to cite all kinds of writers who acknowledge this fact, in Rise of the Masses by Ortega y Gasset. He already points out that the great mass of people is incapable of displaying Superman-like qualities, of creating their own virtues, creating their own destiny in life, and carrying a life with their own responsibility. And here again, I would like to go to a movie that is, in my opinion, a true documentary, and this is the Matrix trilogy, in which the main characters Morpheus and Neo have a discussion, and they are walking through the computer simulation in which all human beings are trapped. And he walks around and says, "Well, why are people not revolting?" And then Morpheus says, well, most of the people are so hopelessly addictive to the matrix, to the system that they are hooked up to, they cannot be detached, because their personality will simply disintegrate. They will have no foothold for their being, for their essence, and they will simply dissolve into nothingness. And I think that the great mass of people would voluntarily march into this cocoon of safety, of predictability, of standing naked before the technological God, than walking their own path and bearing a life with their own responsibilities and duties.
Mhm.
Hans, what's your thought about this?
Yeah, I think I can sympathize with that analysis, and yeah, it's I can see that around me, that people are sort of so much addicted to their cell phones and to their little lives, and to their limited their bubbles of friends, inside their Facebook or WhatsApp groups, that they don't see anything else. If you go to any public place these days, like a station or a bus station or a cafe or whatever, you see everybody looking on his cell phone. Very depressing. You don't see people talking to each other anymore. And what I do when I'm essentially, I look around and I look at these people, and I wonder what they're doing and what they're seeing. And I'm really amazed that nobody is looking around and trying to see what other people are doing, or to take notice of whatever happens around him or her. To me, that's a mystery. I cannot understand that. And I see these people all dressed the same. It's really depressing. So I can I can really see that this is, well, this is not leading to something good. But still, I do have hope that, well, maybe against my better knowledge, that that there might be somewhere a change for the better, hidden in some future sort of cranny or whatever, nook or cranny. I don't know. But indeed, the talk we've been having tonight does not make me any more happy. Sort of makes me really depressed. Sorry. Yes.
To me comes to mind a phrase of Weber. So Weber, he wrote, of course, the Protestantische Ethiek. And his phrase, it was the innerweltliche Askesis.
Yes.
So the ascetic training of the inner world. And of course, what you are referring to, Hans, is quite remarkable. You're saying these people, they do not pay attention to the world outside. They're paying attention to their screen, like a monk pays attention to his prayer book. They all wear the same, like they wear jeans and pajamas. And of course, the monks also all wear the same. And I think instead of just looking at the culture distortion that is taking place through the globalism that takes cultural identity away from Europeans, we can also see something of the inner drive of European men translated into this innerweltliche Askese, which is taking place in a außerweltliche Askese, so the inner worldly ascesis of the Christianity being changed into that outer worldly ascesis. Of course, the WEF has told us, you will own nothing and be happy. And I think there is something to it, because listen, let's take this thesis. Young people, they tend, by all kinds of circumstances, not to be very attached to material goods these days. They are less inclined to pursue lucrative jobs, to pursue wealth. I'm talking statistically as a whole. Of course, there are exceptions, but I'm talking about the white European young people. They tend to be much less focused on career status, material possessions, and let's say the accomplishments of life. Then there also is another thing. They tend to be much less private. Many things that in older generations were supposed to be private, for example, your sex life, your money life, your political opinions, they are just out in the open. They're being discussed and they're being shown even. I'm talking about the great tendencies. I'm not talking about individual cases. And I think something of that overall ascetic drive is being picked up by these technologies, absorbed in these technologies, and the transparency is a very important part that is taking shape in the politics. So people like Ursula von der Leyen, I think they are tapping into this ascetic tendency and saying, okay, you want to be transparent? Let's be transparent. Here, all your political opinions, show them and let them be registered. All your financial transactions, let them be registered. All your sexual preferences, let them be registered. There will be no more private life because we don't need it. It is obsolete. Property is obsolete. Privacy is obsolete. Personality is obsolete. Everything is obsolete. Like kind of an ascetic project but on a very large and politicized scale. This is how it looks to me. This is what I, as a cultural historian, would see
Hmm.
as the destiny that this censorship project is taking us, and which is part of. So I would say the censorship project, it is a part of a larger cultural tendency, which is felt by European history itself, and taps into instinctive drives that have been propagated and have been leading a kind of an autonomous life for centuries now, I would say. I mean, look at our own country, Holland. Holland was one of the first countries that threw off traditional Christianity, that became Protestant, that became
Hmm.
liberal. And what did people do? As soon as they closed the monasteries, they changed the private life completely. They opened the windows, they had houses that you could look through. Honesty became something that was almost that was actually expected and normal. You could keep your doors and windows open in the villages. You could keep your children on the street. Nothing would happen to them. If money was found on the street, it was returned to the owner or to the police station. And this very disciplined life, of course, has shaped our nation. And I think it's taking a next step. It's morphing into a next phase. That's how I look at it.
Hmm. Although, if you allow me, the fact that you can leave the keys out in the door during the day at night, that is not only found in the Netherlands traditionally, no longer, but you also find it in rural areas all over Europe, in Italy, in France, and in Germany, and everywhere else, where people in smaller villages trust their neighbors completely, and they know exactly who is who, and they know they can leave the keys sticking in the door, and they know they have nothing to hide because the neighbors exactly know what they're doing. So this transparency is also found in traditional, often Roman Catholic communities, not only in Dutch traditionally Protestant communities. So it's a phenomenon that you still find in Europe, but not in the Netherlands anymore.
But you would agree that the Dutch have a specific way of being shameless, almost open to the point of shamelessness. I mean, the way that in Dutch villages, the windows are really open, you could literally see what the family was doing, has translated lately, I would say, in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
It's rudeness, unashamed, and
Yes.
showing everything out in the open. I do think, like Weber said, there is something to the Protestantism that has this innerwerkliche ascesis in it. So the inner, the ascetic exercises of the monk being transposed into daily secular life. I think there
Mm-hmm.
is this tendency. I do not think that's deniable. I believe that America is also a good example of that. It's of course also founded by Protestants. And I think this whole censorship project, it is not just imposed. I think there is an organic root and an organic tendency which we need to address to understand it completely. That was actually my main point.
That many people accept it these days because many people in the Netherlands will not see any harm in the government reading their emails. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's your thought, Sietse, to conclude?
Well, to conclude, I would like to end with a more positive note because, well, as we say in the Netherlands, life's a party, but you have to hang the flags yourself. Um, there is like proper bureaucrats, these elites or whatever forces are conjuring up these censorship systems and control systems. They came up with their ideas first and tried to implement them without proper looking at the infrastructure. This is something politicians continually do. They think up monstrous ideas like the Green Deal and try to do, like in Germany, the Energiewende, so the energy transition, and build all kinds of solar farms and windmills, and then come to the conclusion that the electricity net is simply overwhelmed and cannot handle all of these phenomena. So what many people now think and predict for themselves, and I have been to some congresses for my work, and attended some workshops and some lectures about AI. People are absolutely convinced that AI is going to take over large swaths of our society, and that many jobs are going to disappear. But what they do not realize is the enormous energy consumption of AI programs. So, to give a small indication, there was a message in the newspapers, or at least I read it somewhere, that Europeans are being too polite with AI. They are saying good morning and thank you for all the things that the AI program replies. And if you start your discussion with an AI program and you say good morning Grok or good morning ChatGPT, that question alone or that remark alone requires the amount of energy for a household to run their house for half a day in computing power. So to think that this thing is scalable to the level that it's going to artificially control all of humanity with supercomputers is it's a complete dead end. It's a complete dead end because not only are we building enormous server farms for artificial intelligence purposes, but we are also forcing people to use electric heating for their houses, which is completely inefficient in the Netherlands. And we are forcing people to buy electric cars. So that electricity that is available to spread around is being spread around to all kinds of things that are highly energy consumptive. And they want to build an infrastructure on top of that for control that is utterly dependent on electricity. And they've refused to build nuclear power plants. They insist on solar and wind power, which are completely incompatible with their server farms. So this thing is, I think, it's going to bleed out. And if I make a careful prediction, I think that this entire AI thing is a fab, and it's going to go away because it will lose its magic. Because people will see that it actually gives a lot of wrong answers. The main sources for AI programs now are sites like Wikipedia or Reddit or other forums. It doesn't necessarily look in like Google Scholar in scholarly papers or white papers or research papers. It doesn't reference them unless you specifically ask for that. And I have done many debates privately with AI programs, and it just gets so many things wrong. So it's ridiculous. If you think that you can run any sort of business model on such dubious information sources, it's just not going to work. And and perhaps some business like people in communication, I think their jobs are genuinely threatened because it can simply it AI programs can write an information brochure or newsletters and stuff like that. But I truly think that it is a fab and it's going to go away. It's simply not a plausible thing.
Hans, what do you think? Are we heading to the digital gulag? How is it going to work out? How are the kinetic realities going to catch up with that larger projects? What's your take on?
Well, I think that the one thing is, of course, the as you mentioned, the innate European cultural tradition that sort of in a certain sense may have incited the production of what's of the current policies. Okay, that's one thing, and the other thing is the desires of the European rulers. And I think, like most rulers these days, they have no clue really going on. Life around them is too complex, just too complex for the individual rulers, commissars in Europe, to know what's going on the lower levels. Maybe they can see what's happening in their office. They know about their families a bit, but they have no idea what their politics are causing far away in isolated areas, in cities and towns all over Europe. That's one thing. So they're making policies, but they cannot check correctly if these policies have any effect or the desired effect or maybe the opposite effect. And another thing is, of course, the Europeans themselves, the native Europeans that you refer to. But when I look around at the younger people in my family or in my the people that I know, I also see there are people who reject what's happening today and who are aiming for a different kind of life, like a more rural life, or life on a sort of on a farm producing their own vegetables, sort of far away from the cities, far away from the hustle and bustle of big towns. So you see a movement like that from many young people are trying to move to the country and live off grid. So there's this movement, and also there's movements like people taking the children from school and doing homeschooling, which is also a very healthy, very useful sort of phenomenon. And if enough people are doing this, things may not be heading the way that the European commissioners or commissars hope they will. So I still we're in a period where things are being done, but the outcome is uncertain, and they tend to go in a certain direction. And then you can see this one day or one moment. The next moment you can see they're going in another direction. So it's very difficult. We're living in these uncertain times. So it's very difficult to predict what's going to be the effect of all these policies. But I am confident that the system will collapse sooner or later, as every complicated system will sooner or later do. It's impossible to have a complex system and to make it last for a long time. Even if because of the quality they're using in building houses these days. They're using inferior materials, inferior screws, anything is inferior. So you have to repair consistently. And at some point, there will be lack of materials to repair things with. The way things are going now, because as Germany and France and other European countries are being industrially dismantled, there will be less offer of building materials or anything else, and it will be too expensive to import it from China or Korea or wherever else. So the physical circumstances themselves, they will sort of be the obstacle that eventually drives the system to grind to a halt, I think, and I hope.
I concur with the other panelists that probably the kinetic boundaries of this totalitarian, technocratic totalitarian system that we are seeing are going to be reached rather sooner than later. And I also agree with what Hans just said, that we should not forget that although the EU commissars have taken the title of the USSR commissars, there also used to be people commissars, the quality of the ideology behind the European project, the globalist project, and the quality of the people running it is much lower than the Soviet quality of ideas and people was. I mean, there's no comparison between an Ursula von der Leyen and a Leon Trotsky, not in vision and not in personality and not in intelligence. So that can give us also hope for the future, that this system will collapse under its own weight at some point or another. But of course, until that time, a lot of suffering and a lot of strange phenomena can still come our way. In any case, on that way, we will be joining you next time on Leitstern. Audience, we thank you very much for watching this new episode in which we discussed Euro-totalitarian system and censorship. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.